To begin with, according to the World Health Organization, an elderly person is someone over the age of 60. However, what matters to us is not their chronological age, but the symptoms of aging that they present. So this means that you might have a student who is 65 years old and doesn't present any of these symptoms, or maybe presents only one, and you might have a student who is 56 and does present one or two of the symptoms. So it's not a number, but more like the conjunction of these symptoms of aging, what matters to us as teachers. Now, the reason why I decided to talk about this is because I taught elderly students for a few years, and at the beginning, I found it extremely hard, and it required a lot of patience. And the most striking thing was the realization, let's say, that I hadn't been trained for that most teacher training courses teach you how to teach children, teenagers, and adults, and they even make the distinction between young learners and very young learners, but they never mention this age group. So I had to do my own research, talk to a lot of colleagues, share experiences, talk to the students, and reflect upon my own practice, and a lot of trial and error until I managed to develop some strategies, let's say, that helped me do it. So that's why I thought of sharing some tips with you, so that in case that you are interested in teaching this age group, or you are doing so already, but you are new to it, you might find some help. So the first challenge, let's say, is the frequent visual impairment. This means that in the class, sometimes they can be a bit lost because they can't read or they can't see what's on the board. And as simple as it seems, it might make things very difficult for them. So one thing that you can do is enlarge texts when possible. So if you are writing on the whiteboard, make sure your letters are big enough. If you are projecting something, make sure it's big enough for everybody to read. If you are making photocopies and you have one student who is elderly, well, try to enlarge the original text. And another thing is choose easy to read fonts. So the combination of these two things will make it easier for them to be able to read kind of everything and not feel lost in the class. Then another challenge is their poor ability to differentiate relevant from non-relevant information. And I think this is one of the most representative traits of the age group. And you don't need to be their teacher to see this. We all know an elderly person who talks a lot and who says a lot of things which are not really relevant to the point that they are trying to make. And this same difficulty that they have when selecting information when they speak, they have when they receive input. So it is very important for us as teachers to try to tackle this issue. So one thing that you can do is be concise. Be concise when you give instructions, when you explain things, when you ask questions, so that they don't have to select the relevant information because the relevant information has already been selected. Another thing is to use prompts or guidelines to help them be concise when they produce language. So we usually use prompts in tests, for example, in the writing paper or in some speaking activities. But with elderly students, it is good practice to use prompts on a daily basis. So if you are doing a short speaking activity in the classroom, just write a few guidelines on the whiteboard and getting them into the habit of following those prompts to help them be concise, because otherwise they can end up talking about a lot of things which are not really relevant. And then this next tip is very specific but very useful, and it has to do with adapting materials. I've done it a few times when working with very long texts for which tasks are very specific. So what I've done is we read the text together or individually, but the whole text so that they can get the general gist of it. But then I give them an adapted version in which I have removed some sentences or even an entire paragraph, which is redundant or not relevant at all to the task. So that will make it easier for them to find the very specific information that they need, and it will also take shorter time. If you don't want to do this, or if you don't have the time to do this, an alternative is to help them by telling them more or less where the information is. So, okay, the answer to this question is in the first half of the text, or in the 5th paragraph, etc. Okay. Another challenge is that they are slow, and my advice is give them time. I know this might sound a bit too basic, but the reason why I decided to bring it is because they might need a lot of time, twice or maybe 3 times the time of a younger adult. So it is very important for us teachers to allow this time. I know we feel sometimes that we are wasting time, but we do waste time if we rush them through the activities, because when we rush them through the activities, they don't have the time they need to process and internalize the new information. So even when it takes a lot of time, that's what they need. So that is what we should give them. Then shorter attention span. You can see this especially if you have long lessons, an hour and a half or 2 hours. You can see that they get distracted, they start talking about whatever, or they even tell you that they feel very tired. So a few things that you can do are, first, break tasks down. So if you have a task which has a lot of steps within it, or if you have a sequence of tasks that work together, just don't present them all together. If possible, don't even let them know that there is another task coming which is connected to the one we are doing now. Just go one by one, task by task, and that will help them keep focused and concentrated on that only thing that they have to do. Another thing is give them breaks. When you see that they need it, or when they tell you that they need it, just give them a 5-minute break. You can do whatever which is not related to the task. So you can talk about something random, you can watch a short video on YouTube or listen to a song. Talking about videos and songs, it is good for you to have like a short list of resources that you can just use as breaks, so that they get distracted and then they can come back to work with more energy. And then the other thing is, don't be afraid of repeating things. The same way that they repeat things a lot because they've just forgotten that they have already said those things, many times they forget the things that they are told, and they won't remind you of it because they have forgotten themselves. So if you feel that you need to repeat something, and sometimes you might need to repeat it 3 or 4 times in the same class, just don't be afraid of doing so. That's what they need, so just do it. Okay. Then for me, this is one of the biggest ones, and it is their reluctance to use technology. I find that there are 2 main reasons why they don't like using technology, and I've developed my tips, let's say, based on those reasons. So the first reason is that they don't see the point in using technology. So my tip is explain why. And I'll give you an example. I had this group in which I had 2 elderly students who didn't want to use Google Docs or Microsoft Word to do their writing tasks. So I explained to them that when they use Microsoft Word, for example, I can add comments on the site, I can give them better feedback, they can have a look at my feedback, and they can answer or they can edit the text without having to write everything again, and that they themselves can add comments and ask questions when producing that piece of writing, and that the whole process would also be faster because we don't have to wait until the next class for them to hand it in, and then the next class for me to give feedback, and the next class for them to give me the second version, etc. they really understood why it was a good thing to do, and they started doing it. But this came along with my second tip, which is showing how. Because the other reason why they don't like technology is because they just don't know how to use it. So there's no point in you explaining why they should add a comment if you don't show them how to do it. So if you can share your screen or project your screen and actually show them this is how you open a Google Doc, and this is how you add a comment, this is how you resolve a comment, etc. Okay, then the last one is their low self-esteem when it comes to learning. They know that they are slower. They know that they have a bad reputation for not being very good at learning, and that hinders their learning in a way because they are afraid of making mistakes, of participating, etc. So what I do is bring their experiences and expertise into the classroom. Elderly people have a lot of experiences and knowledge that younger people don't have. And it is great to enable them to share these things. It makes them feel better. And in the long term, it builds their self-confidence, their self-esteem. And you will see that they are more willing to participate and talk in the class. So I'm aware I kind of rushed you through the presentation. I was very conscious of time. That's the end of it. Thank you very much for being here, and I will try to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Lucia. Thank you for this insightful talk on such an important matter. We do have to adapt our lessons to fit our students' needs, right?
Yeah.
We do have some questions. Everyone, feel free to add your questions to the chat box as well. So the first question is, where the ability to memorize is weak, does it help to embed the information in stories or explanations?
Can you say the question again? Sorry.
Sure. So as this profile of students shows that their ability to memorize is not that strong, does it help to embed information in stories or different explanation, more customized explanations for them to understand better?
Yes, of course. And same as we do with all students, then putting those things into practice. So for when it comes to memorizing and learning new vocabulary, give them the chance to use those words in a context. And something that they do themselves, I think it's because it's generational and that's how they learned, is they literally memorize things. They come with lists and say, I memorized all these words last weekend. So yeah, it
That's
compensates
true.
because they have those habits.
Yeah, which also reflects the way they used to learn when they were younger, right?
Yeah.
Yes, I have a question for you as well. Has the way you select digital tools changed since you started working with elderly students?
Okay, to be honest, I didn't work with them during the pandemic. I never had elderly students in a digital context, thanks God, because I imagine that would be very difficult.
Definitely, yeah. So that's also something I'd like to ask, which is the difference. But obviously, there's a lot of differences to be discussed. And one more question: are you an advocate of intergenerational groups? What do you think about that?
I think it can be good, but in general, I think it makes things more difficult. For me, for example, with elderly students, it would be ideal to have a group in which they are only elderly students. I think that's very rare. But whereas I see the benefits of intergenerational groups, I think it's better if you just don't mix generations.